presenting to you some of the most tragic events in the maritime history to have ever been noted beside that of Titanic. All in one video. Starting with the SS Sultana, death toll, 1,700. The capitulation of the Confederate Army in April 1865 marked the end of the American Civil War. Thousands of liberated POWs who had served in the Union forces were stuck in the southern states. They were taken to Vicksburg, Mississippi, from where they were shipped back up north by steamboats on the Mississippi River. Built in 1863 in Cincinnati, Ohio, the SS Sultana was one of the many steam paddle ships that had normally carried passengers, mail and goods between New Orleans and St. Louis, and now functioned as troop transporters. At 2 p.m. on the 26th of April 1865, the Sultana, originally designed to carry a maximum of 356 people, left Vicksburg with about 85 crew members, 70 travelers, and 2,300 returning soldiers. Heavily overloaded, she traveled upstream. At 2:40 a.m. on April 27 she was 13 kilometers from Memphis, when one of the ship's 4 boilers exploded. Sharp-edged, glowing red steel parts pierced the decks, crowded with sleeping soldiers. Within minutes, 2 more boilers exploded, turning ship and passengers into cinder and causing the decks above to collapse. Hundreds of panicked people jumped into the water in a desperate attempt to survive, but many were squashed under the ship's falling funnels or drowned by the current. The explosion most likely happened because the crew operated the boilers at an exceedingly high pressure, in order for the overloaded ship to make it upstream against the strong river current. With an estimate of 1,700 deaths, the SS Sultana remains the worst ship disaster in U.S. history. MV La Hula, death toll, 1,863. The MV La Hula was a Senegalese roll-on, roll-off passenger ferry, that sailed regularly between the city of Ziguinchor and the city of Dakar. The ship was designed to sail only on routes of up to 50 nautical miles off the coast. It had a length of 79.5 meters, a beam of 12.5 meters and was designed to carry 550 passengers, 13 vehicles and 250 tons of cargo. On the 26th of September 2002, around 11 a.m., with an estimated 2,000 passengers on board, the La Hula hit a storm off the coast of Gambia and capsized in less than 5 minutes. She drifted on the water surface for more than 20 hours before she sank, taking 1,863 people to the bottom of the ocean. According to the investigation reports on the incident, there were 3 main causes for the sinking of the ferry: the poor maintenance of the government-owned vessel, the grossly negligent overloading of passengers, and the fact that on that day the La Hula sailed on a high-sea route, which it was not designed for. SS Principe Ambero, death toll, 1,926. The SS Principe Ambero, built in 1909, was a passenger ship owned by the Navigazione Generale Italiana. During the First World War, she was converted into a troop ship. She had a length of 145.1 meters, a beam of 16.3 meters and a tonnage of 7,838 GRT. On the 8th of June 1916, while sailing in the Adriatic with 1,926 aboard, she was torpedoed by an Austro-Hungarian U-5 submarine and sank only minutes later, leaving no survivors behind. The Principe Ambero was the maritime disaster with the greatest number of lives lost during the First World War. The Mont Blanc in Halifax, death toll, 2,000. On the 6th of December 1917, off the Canadian east coast at Halifax, the French ammunition freighter SS Mont Blanc collided with the Norwegian ship SS Imo, caught fire and exploded. At least 2,000 people met their death and thousands more suffered gruesome injuries. The explosion was so powerful that it caused a tidal wave and violent tremors which uprooted trees out from the ground, damaged railroad tracks, and destroyed numerous buildings whose debris were scattered hundreds of yards away. The Halifax explosion was one of the most violent non-nuclear explosions in history. It is considered the world's largest accidental man-made explosion. On no other day between the American Civil War, 1861-1865, and the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center 2001, have so many people been killed in a single man-made incident on the North American continent. YUMATO Battleship, death toll, 2,498. Built in 1941, the YUMATO was a Japanese battleship that served in the Second World War. On the 7th of April 1945, about 300 kilometers south of the Japanese island of Kyushu, the YUMATO was bombed and hit by U.S. carrier-based aircraft, causing it to capsize. The capsizing caused the ammunition on board to explode, tearing the ship in two. After 13 torpedo hits and 8 heavy bombing hits, the ship finally sank with the loss of 2,498 lives. The light cruiser Yahagi and 4 destroyer escorts were also sunk in the same attack, killing over 1,000 additional crew members. SS Kangya, death toll, 2,750 to 3,920. The SS Kangya, originally known as SS Singya Maru, was a coastal passenger steamship built in 1939 by the Harima Shipbuilding and Engineering Company for the Tokyo-based shipping company Toa Kaiun Kabushiki Keisha. In 1947, Toa Kaiun sold the ship to the Chinese shipping company China Merchant Steam Navigation Company, which started operating regular sailings from Shanghai to several cities along the Chinese coast. On 3 December 1948, the ship left the port of Shanghai on a trip to Ningbo. That evening the Kangya, originally designed to carry up to 1,186 passengers, sailed with 2,250 officially registered passengers aboard. Due to the ongoing civil war at the time, large numbers of people fled from the approaching communist troops and approximately 1,200 additional passengers boarded the ship unofficially. As the ship passed the mouth of the Wampu-Jiang River, an explosion occurred near the stern of the ship, and the Kangya sank in shallow water shortly after. Rescue vessels arrived hours later, as the ship's radio function had been cut off by the explosion. It is estimated that anywhere between 2,750 to 3,920 people died that night. The reason for the explosion was never determined, but it was assumed that the ship had hit a Japanese sea mine. Iosif Stalin, death toll, 3,849. The Iosif Stalin was a Soviet passenger ship that was converted into a troop transporter during the Second World War. The ship was used in 1941 in the evacuation of Tallinn and later in the evacuation of the Soviet naval base in Hanko, Finland. On 3 December 1941, with 5,589 soldiers on board, the ship entered the Gulf of Finland and ran into 3 German mines. While the crew was attempting to salvage the ship from the damage caused by the mines, Finnish forces spotted the ship and opened fire, causing onboard ammunition to detonate. Out of the 5,589 soldiers aboard the Iosif Stalin, 3,849 died and the rest were captured as prisoners of war by the German forces. RMS Lancastria, death toll, 4,006,500. The RMS Lancastria was a British ocean liner, owned by the Cunard Line. In April 1940, she was reconstructed as a troopship and under the command of Captain Rudolf Sharp, she was sent off to aid the evacuation of British troops and citizens from France. The ship left Liverpool on 14 June 1940, and anchored near the town of Saint-Nazaire on June 16. By the following day, the Lancastria took between 4,000 and 9,000 refugees on board, including British civilians, soldiers and other military officials. At around 4 p.m., a German Junkers Ju-88 bombed the ship, causing it to capsize and sink within 20 minutes. More than 1,400 tons of fuel leaked into the water and partly caught fire. While there were 2,477 survivors, it is difficult to determine the exact number of deaths, as loading of the ship was hectic and many passengers boarded off the record. Estimates show that anywhere between 4,000 and 6,500 passengers died in the attack from drowning, suffocating, or by direct hit. MV Donapa's death toll, 4,386. The MV Donapa was a Philippine ferry belonging to the Sulpicio Lines. On 20 December 1987, on the way from Leyte to Manila, the Donapa collided with the oil tanker Mount Vector, owned by Cultex Philippines. The tanker's cargo of 8,800 barrels of petroleum products exploded and led to a quickly spreading fire. The Donapa took 2 hours to sink and was followed by the Vector 2 hours later. Only 24 passengers from the Donapa and 2 crew members from the Vector were rescued. As none of the lifeboats could be suspended, the few survivors had to swim through the flames to get to safety. The official death toll released in the investigation reports was 4,317 passengers, 58 crew members of the Donapa and 11 crew members of the Vector. Again, as in some of the cases previously discussed, the ship was overloaded way past its maximum capacity of 1,518 people. In addition, the investigation concluded that the Donapa was not equipped with a radio and that the onboard boxes containing the life jackets were all locked. It was also found that the crew of the Vector was not sufficiently qualified and that the operation license of the tanker had expired. It took all of 8 hours for the authorities to learn of the disaster, and another 8 hours until a search and rescue operation started, which then proved futile. The Donapa remains the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster of all time, with almost 3 times more casualties than the Titanic. SS Cap Arona, death toll, 5,000. The SS Cap Arona was a luxury ocean liner launched in 1927 and was the flagship of the Hamburg South America Line. In April 1945, with the advance of the British Army, prisoners from concentration camps were evacuated and brought to Lübeck. More than 9,000 prisoners from the Neuengamme concentration camp and survivors of the death marches were loaded onto ships, amongst them the Cap Arona. On the 3rd of May 1945, with more than 6,000 people on board, the ship was attacked by fighter bombers of the British Air Force. The Cap Arona capsized but did not sink because of the shallow water. Around 5,000 of the prisoners aboard drowned, burned alive, or were shot dead. Those who attempted to swim away from the shipwreck were shot at by soldiers from the British forces. In the same attack, shortly before the Cap Arona was hit, the SS Thielbeck, a cargo steamship also filled with prisoners, was bombed and sunk, killing 2,750 of the 2,800 people aboard. HS Armenia, death toll, 5,000. The HS Armenia was a Soviet passenger ship launched in November 1928 in Leningrad at the Baltic shipyard. The ship had a length of 112.15 meters, a beam of 15.54 meters and a maximum capacity of 980 passengers. During the Second World War, the Armenia was used as a troop transporter. From the 9th of October 1941, the Armenia would evacuate soldiers, workers and materials from Odessa. Due to the invasion of German troops in November 1941, a rushed evacuation of the hospitals in the city of Sevastopol was ordered and the Armenia was converted into a hospital ship. On the 6th of November 1941, the Armenia took on board about 4,000 wounded and medical personnel from a total of 11 hospitals in Sevastopol and sailed towards Yalta. Once there, she took on board around 1,000 additional passengers, none of which were officially recorded during the rushed boarding. On November 7, the Armenia was attacked by a German Heinkel 111 bomber and sank in just 4 minutes, killing approximately 5,000 people. Only 8 people survived the disaster. There is no mention in German records from the attack that the Armenia was a hospital ship. She was perhaps mistakenly believed to be a troop carrier. MV Goya, death toll, 7,000. The MV Goya was a cargo ship built in 1940 for the shipping company as J. Ludwig Mawinkel's Reedery in Bergen, Norway. After the German occupation of Norway in April 1940, the Goya was seized by the Kriegsmarine. During the last months of the war, the ship was deployed to evacuate the German eastern provinces. By mid-April, the ship had already evacuated 19,785 people to the west in only 4 trips. On April 16, the ship was to evacuate more wounded soldiers and fleeing civilians from West Prussia. At 11:52 p.m., with more than 7,000 passengers on board, the ship was hit by the Soviet submarine L-3 and sank within 7 minutes. Only 176 people survived. MV Wilhelm Gustaf, death toll, 9,400. Towards the end of World War II, the Nazi regime had rejected an early evacuation of East Prussia. Hence, after the breakthrough of the Red Army on the Eastern Front at the beginning of 1945, many inhabitants of the province were cut off from the rest of the Reich. On January 21 the same year, a series of transfers began, jointly known as Operation Hannibal, during which wounded soldiers and civilians were transported by ship through the Baltic Sea to the Western Reich territory. The former cruise ship MV Wilhelm Gustaf, transformed to serve as a troop transporter, was also part of the evacuation. On the 30th of January 1945 at around 1 p.m., the Wilhelm Gustaf began her journey from Gdynia with an estimated 10,300 people aboard, both soldiers and civilians, including many children. The exact number of passengers and crew could never be determined with certainty, as the boarding was chaotic and hasty. The ship originally left escorted by 2 torpedo boats and by the passenger ship Hansa, also filled with civilians and soldiers. Shortly after the departure, one of the torpedo boats and the Hansa encountered mechanical complications and could not sail further. This sudden change in the situation left the Wilhelm Gustaf with only one escort, the torpedo boat Lowe. At the time of the departure, some of the military officials on board suggested to Captain Friedrich Petersen that it would be best to sail through dark, shallow coastal waters where submarines could not operate. Captain Petersen, however, decided to take a route through the deep water due to the heavy overloading of the ship. In addition, a supposed radio message from the Navy warned the ship to turn on its lights in order to avoid a collision with one of the mine-searching vessels on the route. Due to this message, whose sender was never identified, the Wilhelm Gustaf sailed with her lights on, making it easy for anyone to spot her. Around 9 p.m., the Wilhelm Gustaf was sighted by the Soviet submarine S-13. The submarine fired 4 torpedoes at the ship, 3 of which hit the Wilhelm Gustaf at the bow, under the E-deck and in the engine room. At 10:15 p.m., the ship finally sank about 23 nautical miles off the coast of Pomerania, taking 9,400 people with it, many of which were women and children. In terms of the number of lives lost, the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustaf remains to this day the worst maritime disaster in human history.